reading is sexy. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm here with a highly requested video. I want to talk about the books that have helped me to learn more about masculine and feminine energies. I have a disclaimer. Honestly, connecting to your masculine and feminine energies is not going to come from a book. I know, the video could end right here and then it would be a really short video, right? You can learn about the theories behind them, but it is really important that you implement them in everyday life. And I would say it's actually easier to learn about masculine energy from a book because masculine energy does tend to be more of the mind. You do still need to embody it in everyday life, and I do think there's a ton of aspects to masculine energy that are things that you really do need masculine leaders in order to lead men into, and actually that's why I think men's groups and men's mentors and things like that are so important for men. They're important for women as well, and I think having women's groups, women's circles. I've learned way more about feminine energy from online courses than I have from books. When it comes to feminine energy, books don't necessarily really get the job done so much because feminine energy is a hard thing to talk about in print. So I have some recommendations for you, but I would encourage you, particularly if you are a feminine cord being and you want to connect to your feminine energy, doing something like an online course, joining a women's group, something like that is actually going to be way more beneficial for you. Similar for masculine energy, although I do think that it's easier for you to learn more about masculine energy from a book than it is necessarily feminine energy. So I'm just going to highlight some of these. I have a huge book collection. Like, I love books and I can't get into audiobooks, I can't get into ebooks. Like, I need a physical book. Like, there's something sensual about that. I talked about that in my 84 Charing Cross Road review. There's something sensual about books. Now, of course, none of these are really like high quality books that I have in my collection here. You know, most of them are just paperbacks I got from Amazon, but I do love the feeling of a book and actually sitting there and reading a book. And I thought this was a perfect time to do this video because we're kind of back in school, so we're thinking about education, and also the weather is getting cooler, so many of us are actually thinking about like cuddling up with a good book in front of a warm fireplace. If you have a warm fireplace. I don't have a warm fireplace. If you have someone to cuddle with, I don't have anyone to cuddle with, so I have my books. So there you go. This video is primarily focused on masculine and feminine energies, so I'm not going to get into a lot of like healing books, but there are a couple that I want to note at the beginning because I really do think if you want to tap into your masculine or your feminine energies, it's really important to heal the blockages that you have to tapping into those energies and the blockages and the wounds and the traumas that have happened in your life that have led you to not being connected with those energies. Just a couple that I want to note. This is not a complete list. The first one that really kind of snowballed my journey into getting into this masculine feminine world. It really isn't about masculine feminine energies, but I found it incredibly healing. This got me through my divorce, so I really want to recommend it. That's The Magic. This book is really all about gratitude. It's essentially about gratitude, and the process is, I forget how many days this is, but they actually bring you through is it 28 day? I think it's 28-day process of connecting to gratitude. And I've actually done this 28-day process a couple times over the past few years, and every time I do, I just feel like it's a very healing process for me. So while this isn't specifically about masculine and feminine, gratitude is hugely important for working through any of these energies, so I highly recommend this book. I've also mentioned this in a few videos before. If you are someone who has suffered from narcissistic or psychological abuse in your past, Healing from Hidden Abuse by Shannon Thomas is incredibly, incredibly helpful. If you are healing from any type of toxic relationship, I think this book could be really helpful for you. You don't even have to actually diagnose the person as being a narcissist or anything like that. This just has a lot of tips for healing if part of your problem has been from past relationships, whether it be romantic relationships or parent-child relationships or anything like that. This book was really helpful for me. Also love Existential Kink. It's a fun read. I mean, if you're gonna do the healing work, I think this is kind of a fun book. It takes a different look at healing. It talks a little bit about shadow work and stuff like that. I'll be honest with you, the first time I read it, I didn't connect to it as much, and then the stuff started implementing into my life kind of gradually. It wasn't like an instant healing kind of a book. And then I read it a second time and like more stuff happened. So this is definitely a book that I feel like you can read and then it kind of, it's like a slow release kind of a book where like the lessons in it kind of scatter throughout your life. Some of these books, like, you'll read them and you'll feel like an instant change, but this one I think definitely was kind of like a slow moving process, but I am really glad I read this book. And I also, if you have issues with like money mindset, particularly if you're trying to heal your feminine energy and you're trying to tap into abundance, It's Not Your Money by Tasha Silver. It's an 8-week process, and sometimes I like to start this like January 1st as like my start the new year, change my money mindset kind of thing. I work on money mindset a lot. It's a big blockage for me, so I found this book really helpful. So let's get into masculine energy. Now, when it comes to learning about masculine energy, I actually think that these books should be required reading if you are a masculine man. I think these books are also really helpful for feminine women who want to learn more about masculine men, because it does help you really understand how men think and how men tick and how men are different from us, and also understanding more about men and also realizing that not all men are bad. I mean, many women have that in their heads. So I highly recommend these books for men, but I definitely recommend them for women as well. The first one that I think should be required reading for every human on the planet that's going to interact with other humans is King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore. This book is essentially about the masculine archetypes, which are listed in the title here. This book talks about, especially in the beginning of it, where it talks about kind of how masculinity kind of fell off course in the course of our society, and it really does explain so much why men are the way they are today, and gives a little bit of insight as to how we might heal that, which I think is vital. I mean, I think everybody needs to embrace this book because it's just got so much great information in here about, you know, a lot of what I share about masculinity. I know I get a lot of comments from guys in some of my posts like, what right does a woman have to tell men about masculinity and stuff? I get a lot of my information from this book. This book is incredible at really breaking down men stepping into their masculinity and like how their pasts and traumas in society can affect them stepping into these different archetypes. Really recommend this book. Highly think every man should read this book, and I think this book would be really helpful for women to understand men and masculinity. So this is a must read. Another must read for masculine energy, this is of course going to be on the list. That is The Way of the Superior Man by Deida. Every man needs to read this book. Every woman needs to read this book. I've read it a couple times. Now, a few caveats. For one, I do think there are a lot of men that read this book, and a pattern I've noticed, I'm not saying all men do this, but a pattern I've noticed is that many men will read this book and then they'll just take little excerpts and little quotes and then they'll just make it mean whatever they think that it should mean. And they don't actually read the wholeness of the message. And I think it's really important, if a man is going to read this, that he actually read the whole thing and really focus on the whole thing and not just the little parts that kind of serve his own agenda, but actually read and embrace the whole thing and the ideas as a whole. For women who are going to read this book, I'm gonna give you a warning. First time I read this book, and I've read it a couple times, I had a lot of triggers that came up. A lot of stuff. There were definitely moments where I had to put the book down and I had to walk away and I had to just step away from it for a little while. So if you are a woman who is not really ready to face your triggers and work through your triggers, maybe wait on this book a little bit. Just saying. I was at a point when I read this that I was actually willing to face my triggers and actually work through them and learn how to move through them, and this book was actually a big part of that process. I'm not saying it's overall not hugely triggering. There were just a few moments in this book where things came up for me that I wasn't expecting. And it's interesting, a few of the chapters that did trigger me, they would trigger me at first and I went into this major like, oh my god, like, you know, freak out kind of response. And then I would set it aside and then I would go back, I would reread the chapter, and I would realize that I was projecting my own stuff onto this chapter and that what was said in the book was not actually what I was making it mean. I'm not saying every woman is going to go through that process. I'm just saying that's what happened for me. So I just think it's really important for women, if you are going to read this book, because I do recommend it, because I do think it's really helpful for understanding men and the differences between men and women and how they think. I just want to let women know that there might be some things in this book that might bring up stuff for you, and to just really be mindful of that. And if you don't really feel like you're ready to actually work through things that might come up and traumas and triggers or things like that, then maybe wait on this book until you've done a little bit more healing work on yourself. But I do really highly recommend this book for men and women, because I do think this is a really important read for just how men and women are different and how men think and masculinity. And yeah, I really do think that this is a really important book. Another book that I actually have not read all the way through, and it's not even really so much about the whole book as much as it is about one particular chapter, and that is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. There's a chapter in here about sexual transmutation that really does break down men and success and talks about age and men's sexual prowess and things like that. And I also talked about this book in my The Value of Older Women video here on YouTube, because it touches on that topic a little bit and the value of a woman in a man's life, which I think is really important. So that particular chapter I think is really vital to learning about masculine, feminine, men and women, and that kind of dynamic. So I recommend that particular chapter in this book. I mean, overall, it's not that it's a bad book, it's just that it's not necessarily tied to masculine and feminine energies. Overall, that particular chapter on sex transmutation does have a lot of masculine, feminine kind of dynamics in it. Another book about masculine energy, it's written for women to talk about men, is David Deida's It's a Guy Thing, an Owner's Manual for Women. I mean, this triggered me way more than The Way of the Superior Man. So there's definitely things in here that I was like, I don't really want to hear that. Like, this is I think one of his older books. I'm glad I read it. I just realized I have so many pages like earmarked like in here to go back to, but I would recommend The Way of the Superior Man over this one. But I do think if you really want to dig into the male mind, you can read this book. I didn't necessarily leave this book feeling as good about men as I did after reading The Way of the Superior Man. I felt a little bit conflicted about men more after I read this book, but I did want to mention it because I do think it is relevant. If you're really ready to work on your triggers and face some uncomfortable facts about men and women, I wanted to shout it out because it is specifically written for women about men. So The Way of the Superior Man is really written for men by men, whereas this one is written about men for women. I still think The Way of the Superior Man is better and a better read, but I did want to just give this one a shout out. So most of the books I'm going to recommend honestly are by David Deida because I'm a big fan of his work. As far as feminine energy, Dear Lover is kind of the woman's version of Way of the Superior Man, and it's kind of written like by a man for women, and I recommend this book. I really do. I've read this a few times and I really do enjoy this book very much, and I think that this definitely explains a lot of the play and the dynamics between the masculine and the feminine. So of all of David Deida's books, The Way of the Superior Man and Dear Lover are probably my top recommendations. I would also say like Intimate Communion, which is an earlier work of his, does also cover a lot of the basics of masculine feminine dynamics. Finding God Through Sex is another amazing one, and this one gets a lot more into the spirituality of the masculine and the feminine, and it gets into like each chapter has like a for him and for her, so it really does give a balanced view of the masculine essence and the feminine essence in each situation. Blue Truth is a little bit more spiritual, I would say. All of his books really do have a masculine feminine dynamic to them, so I recommend this one as well. I'm actually rereading the Enlightened Sex Manual. This is a little bit more of like a, it's not really an instructional book per se, but it has a lot more specific skills as far as sexual intimacy goes, as opposed to the dance of the masculine and the feminine. I mean, there is always that thread of spirituality and the dance of the masculine and feminine throughout all of David Deida's books, but this one is a little bit more about skill set and actual like sexual techniques and things like that, which are important obviously when you're talking about masculine and feminine polarity, but this is a little bit more instructional as opposed to the other ones that are a little bit more spiritual. Now getting into specifically feminine energy, there's a couple books that I want to recommend, and these books they're not my favorites. I know a lot of people worship them, and I think part of the reason why they're not necessarily my favorites is because I had already started learning about the masculine and feminine and really tapping into my feminine energy when I read these books, so they felt a little bit redundant maybe, or I didn't really connect to them as much because I was already kind of on my own journey. However, if you are someone who is like brand new to this stuff, you really don't know where to turn or where to go, I do think that these books could be a nice introduction for you into the world of the masculine and the feminine. The first one is iconic. It's Pussy. I mean, I did get a lot from this book, and I read this book really early on in my feminine energy journey, although I will admit I did feel like working in women's groups, doing online courses, things like that, got me so much more than reading this book. So I know there's a lot of women who read this book, and I think it's a great catalyst. Like, I think a lot of women read this book and then they want to do more. So I do think this is a nice like gateway to feminine energy, so to speak, if you're really new and looking for a place to start. For me, it wasn't the here-all end-all. I know so many women talk about this book changing their lives. I didn't find this book as life-changing, but then again, I was already kind of on my journey when I read this, so it didn't have quite the same impact. Feminine Genius is a similar one. It's very much like Pussy. It's kind of, again, it's a nice place to start. It's a great starting point. It just, for me personally, it wasn't quite as life-changing because I was already doing some of this work already. But I do think if you're new and you really want to just kind of find a place to start and kind of see what direction you feel like going with your feminine energy, this could be a good place to start. As well, I didn't finish this one because it's like really in-depth. It's a little bit more about the female body and the changes of our body, which are super important. It's Womb Awakening, and I actually did not finish this. It's a really long book, and it tends to get a little bit, I don't know, it has a textbooky kind of feel to it, just like the feeling of it. More in-depth. I would say if you want a really starting point, Pussy or Feminine Genius are probably the way that you want to go. But this one gets a little bit more into the feminine body and connecting with your body, your cycle, your womb, stuff like that. When it comes to learning about the feminine body, your cycles, womb awakening, that kind of stuff, Beyond the Pill and The Fifth Vital Sign, I actually just read these two books. I actually just finished them recently. I will be fully honest with you that some of the stuff in these books, as far as the supplements and the foods and things like that, I think are a little bit up in the air. I do a lot of research on nutrition and things like that, and that's a whole separate thing. So I don't necessarily recommend following these blind. I don't recommend following any of these books blindly. I think it's really important to tune into your intuition. However, if you have had issues with hormones, you do have issues with anything having to do with women's health, or actually anything to do with health in your body, your cycles, if you've been on hormonal birth control, anything like that, these books are a great place to heal from that, to work on that. I highly recommend both of them. I actually kind of read them simultaneously. They're very similar. So yeah, if you're looking to work on really anything that is connected to your hormones, or anything that is connected to, it gets into mental health, it gets into your cycles, and to embrace your cycles, stuff like that. You know, feminine energy is tied to being in your body. So actually being in your body requires you to have a healthy connection to your body, and these books will definitely help you with that. So a couple books that are not specifically about feminine energy, but I do find them to be helpful in certain areas of feminine energy. One is Big Magic, because I really did find this book to be really great to connect with creativity. It is all about creativity, and it's by Elizabeth Gilbert. I actually did not read Eat, Pray, Love. I watched the movie. I've actually mentioned this in my Under the Tuscan Sun breakdown, that I didn't love Eat, Pray, Love as a movie. Personal feelings, but so I kind of hesitated reading Big Magic, and I just didn't really know if it would interest me. But yeah, this really is all about creativity. Feminine energy is creative energy, and this is all about tapping into your creativity. Not necessarily from a feminine perspective, but I do think that this was really helpful tapping into creativity and stuff, which is part of feminine energy, so I wanted to give this a shout out. I have read a lot of books about dating and relationships over the years, like a lot of them. I could probably do a whole video just reviewing books about dating and relationships, but I do find a lot of them, for me, when it comes to the masculine and the feminine, to be a little bit more strategic. It's one of the reasons why I actually like Deida's books, even though many of them are not specifically about dating per se. They tend to feel more natural. It's more about like bringing yourself to a relationship and then like letting the right person magnetized to you. I'm not going to delve into like dating and relationship advice books, even though I have like piles of them. I will say that the Mars and Venus series, I read the original Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus book actually when I was like a kid, like really young, because I was really into that stuff back then. And I've read a few other books in that Mars and Venus kind of genre. I love them. I haven't read them in a while, so I think I'd have to read them again to really know how they fully tie into the masculine and the feminine, but I do think there is a correlation there. Even though those books are a little bit older, I would recommend some of them. This actually was a random book that got recommended to me in a women's group that I was in. It's Getting to I Do, the Secret to Doing Relationships Right by Dr. Patricia Allen. It's a little outdated in just the way that it's written. It feels very similar to The Rules, if you've read The Rules, which I do actually love. I love the idea of The Rules, but I do feel like they do feel a little bit forced and a little bit less natural, whereas I feel like when you connect with your feminine energy, you kind of naturally play by the rules. Feminine energy, I don't really think of as having rules per se. I don't really believe in that kind of aspect to it, but I do feel like when you really connect to your feminine energy and all of your feminine archetypes, you kind of naturally play by the rules, which is why I like connecting to your feminine energy as opposed to reading a bunch of rules and thinking like, oh my god, how many days can I call him back? How many days can I this? Whatever. When you're in your feminine energy, you're open and receptive, so you're not chasing men anyway, so you don't really need specific rules to tell you that. But Getting to I Do actually does break down. It doesn't really reference it as being masculine and feminine, but it mentions the way that men view relationships and women view relationships in a kind of a unique way. And I've read a lot of dating books, and this one I feel like kind of really does portray the masculine feminine dance a little bit better than many of the other books that I've read. So I wanted to give this one a shout out. It was a really random book that just got recommended to me, and I kind of was like, oh, this actually does make a lot of sense. So I really did, I just want to give this one a shout out. So the last category I want to get into is more like feminine energy, spirituality. Now David Deida's books for sure fall into those categories. I just kind of put his books into a category all their own. This is like specifically just for feminine spirituality, and you can't really talk about that without talking about Mary Magdalene Revealed. And I know this book is probably not going to be for everybody because it is a little controversial. This book is somewhat feminist, which I don't really consider myself a feminist. I have videos talking about my views on feminism. But as someone who is not so much religious, and I don't necessarily associate myself with an organized religion, but I do find myself connecting much more to my spirituality, I found this book to be really eye-opening and kind of, especially as somebody coming from a Catholic background and trying to figure out her own spirituality. I'm actually rereading this book now. I've read it before. It's not going to be for everyone. It is a little controversial, particularly if you are very much serious about being in the Christian religions or you have very specific religious views. For me, and as somebody who was kind of exploring how I felt about spirituality and stuff, I found this book to be really eye-opening. So I want to shout it out. Not going to be for everybody, but for those that this is for, you're really going to love it. So just wanted to throw that out there. This book actually just kind of came to me in an Amazon suggestion and I was drawn to it. This is The Path of the Priestess. Not my favorite book ever, but I did find this really helpful as far as talking about different feminine energy and different cultures and different religions and different aspects of divine feminine energy. I really did find this book interesting. And honestly, my favorite book for tapping into feminine energy overall, I would say, I mean, other than David Deida's teachings about feminine energy, this book is probably the go-to when it comes to studying feminine energy, and that is Awakening Shakti by Sally Kempton. This book goes into all of the Hindu goddesses, which really does kind of run the gamut of different archetypes in feminine energy, different perspectives of feminine energy. There's a lot of guided exercises, guided meditations, things like that. So it's more interactive type book. It's also written in a way where you can actually decide which goddesses you want to study. Each chapter is a different goddess and you can actually tap into her energy in each chapter. You can read it all the way through, or you can just pick the one that you want to learn more about and connect with more. And I found this book to be the most helpful. I'm going back in and studying some of the goddesses in this book, you know, whenever I feel like I need to. So you don't actually have to be connected to Hindu religion or anything like that, or any specific type of religion, to just kind of connect to the goddesses, the archetypes. The goddesses really are representations of the different feminine archetypes. So as far as connecting to feminine energy specifically, I would say this one is probably the go-to book that I would recommend. That and anything by David Deida, I would say, is probably #1 for connecting to your feminine energy. Obviously, Beyond the Pill and The Fifth Vital Sign for actually connecting to your physical feminine body, I think are probably my next big recommendations. And obviously for masculine energy, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and The Way of the Superior Man. I have so many books, and those are just the ones that I really felt like needed to be highlighted. And a big part of connecting to your feminine energy specifically is to tap into your intuition. So I would say, if you want to know which book to start with, like, just tap into your body and just feel into, which one am I called to? Like, which one do I feel like I'm called to start with first? That's probably the one you want to start with. It's really tuning into your intuition. And for me, honestly, like, I have a whole bookshelf and I just kind of go to, okay, which one do I feel called to diving into? I've read some of these more than once. Some of them I've only read once. Some of them I haven't actually even completely finished yet. I have a lot of other books that people have recommended to me that I haven't gotten started with yet, but to be honest, I kind of just go with whichever ones seem to be calling to me at the time. So that's very much tapping into your feminine, is just really feeling into intuitively which one do you think is calling to you in that moment. So these are my top recommendations, and this was a highly requested video, so I truly hope you found this helpful. If you have any other book recommendations that you would like to mention that I didn't mention here, please let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below, and then check out other people's comments so you can see what other people are reading. I mean, I would love if this kind of could become like a little bit of a community where you guys could share with each other which books you really liked and which ones you didn't, which ones you felt were helpful, which ones you didn't, you know. I would love that. So make sure you leave a comment in the comment section below if you have any book recommendations or have any thoughts on any of these books or any other books or anything like that. You know, I love your suggestions. If you have any other topics you'd like me to discuss, this was a highly requested topic. So I love when you guys request topics, because I really want to create content that you find helpful. So if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you want to connect with your feminine energy, again, I really do think that doing an online course or joining a women's group or something like that is the way to go. I have online courses about feminine energy, so details in the description box below if you want more information, and all the links to my social media accounts will be there as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.